video, I'll show you some of the tricks I use to create this animation and provide you some tips so that you don't make the same mistakes I made. Stick around to the end and I'll show you where I am with my current boss fight animation, and I have a little surprise for you as well. So I started off by modeling the can. Initially I was thinking this would be a simple can render, but I really tried to allow my imagination to just run wild with it. I wasn't set on what the end result would be. But one thing I would recommend, even though a can is something you may feel like you look at regularly and you can really picture in your mind, grab reference images. A few minutes into modeling I realized there were a few things that just weren't looking quite right, and I grabbed some reference images and I fixed some of those things about the shape of the can, but overall the top rim of the can, I don't feel like I got that just right. The bottom of the can has a pretty large dimple that I didn't get right. Also, the tab on the top of the can, for some reason in my mind I imagined that it wasn't in the middle of the can, but after looking at the reference images I realized that it actually is in the middle in most cases. So this is something else I got wrong. So I say all this to reinforce that sometimes when we picture things in our mind that we feel like we see on a regular basis, our memories lie to us. And even these minor things, if they aren't right, they take away from the realism. Our brain will look at it and go, something about that's not quite right. So if you want something to look right, get references. Now, this wasn't an important project that I really needed to have look amazing. So if I had, I would have done much nicer topology on the top of the can. In fact, here's a picture I got off of Topology guide that shows really nice reference for a top of the can. I just did some quick little hacks because this was just a little weekend fun project that I was working on to make the top of the can, look like the top of a can. Then I started modeling the tab, which is, I just made it from a simple plane and used some modifiers to give it thickness, and I used a subsurface modifier. I extruded the edges to make the tab read a little bit more like a tab. That said, I do feel like I spent way too much time on this tab. When you're doing animations, it's good to block things out. Get your camera set up early. Know what your final project is. That way you know what your final shot will be. You know what will be in the foreground, what will be in the background. This information helps you determine where you need to spend the majority of your time, and you won't spend your time on things that aren't in the final render. Like this tab isn't in the final render, nobody sees it, and yet I spent all this time on it. So 3D artwork takes enough time that being able to accurately determine where you need to spend your time is huge in speeding up your workflow. For a lazy Sunday morning, it was a fun little project to play around with, but if you're doing this for a client where money is involved, don't spend time on something that isn't in the final render. Then I went to Krita and I created the label that would be wrapped around the can. And after playing around with a bunch of different color options, I settled on a final result that I was pretty happy with. But the stripe really started to give me problems because when I wrapped it around the can, you could see the seam and it didn't look good. So I thought about scratching my whole turntable idea because I was going to render it and kind of turntable it as I rendered it, and I thought I could get away with not doing that, and then I don't have to worry about the seam. But when you run into little problems like this, if you push through and try and solve them, those solutions usually work in 10, 12, 15 different other situations. So Krita has this really cool feature that allows you to create a tileable texture, so that's what I used. So at this point I was feeling pretty good about the render. I think this looks pretty good, but I realized I was missing something. My word. And as such is beyond condensation. I followed a tutorial from CJ Matter on geometry nodes about adding condensation to an object, which is a great tutorial. I've included a link in the description. I hadn't used geometry nodes much, but this really got me interested in them and what all they could do. So here's the can render. Then I got this idea and I thought, oh man, it would be cool if I animated it and it looked like it was being blasted into the air by water. Looking at this animation, I realized the can doesn't decelerate at the top of its arc, which it would normally do in real life, so that breaks the realism a little bit. This is again something, reference images in terms of animation are also really beneficial. So this isn't the best animation, but for a weekend project, I was pretty happy with it. Oh, now for the surprise. This can animation blend file is posted for free on my Gumroad. There's a link in the description, so feel free to go and download it. And then I also was going to include my final boss fight animation. This is the final render. I'm really not happy with it. I would have liked to have done so much more, but I spent 120 hours rendering just this. So it was all I could do to get it into the deadline, which was August 27th, 2023. That's how that went. Anyway, thanks so much for sticking around and watching the video. I hope you learned something. I know I did, and I'll see you next time.